Welcome, friends, to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And we are off this week for Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to anyone who celebrates. But we are releasing a From the Vault episode, which is our Murder on the Orient Express 2017 remake, directed by Kenneth Branagh.
Yeah, I think since we covered this, there has been another of these Kenneth Branagh adaptations of Agatha Christie.
Murder on the Nile?
Yeah, I think so.
Like
Death
that.
on the Nile.
Death on the Nile, thank you. Something we could cover at some point.
Right.
We didn't love this movie, but it was interesting, and there was I think we had a good discussion about it.
Well, we had a chance to cover the other Poirot adaptation of Murder on the Orient Express, right?
You know, honestly, I don't remember much about this. Maybe I like it more than I remember. I'll be curious to listen to this episode again.
We were having to compare and contrast, obviously, with the older version, and I think there were things that we loved about the older version.
Great cast. I remember that.
Yeah, I mean, great cast in this one, too.
I did just want to say we have a poll up now on our Patreon that'll be determining our very next project. And if you'd like to vote on it, you got to get on there before the 26th. Basically, the end of the night on the 25th, it'll close. And the 4 titles that are up on this poll are Fight Club, Casino Royale, The Devil All the Time, and Stardust. Those are the ones that ended up with the most votes on our ongoing yearly thread for suggestions. So those will be the 4. Pick which one of those 4 you want most. Give it a vote on our Patreon, and that'll be the next thing we do. And next year we will start with a clean slate and have a whole new thread. So if you have another title that you really wanted to hear us cover, look for that at the start of next year as your chance to get us to do it.
Really great lineup. Some titles in there that we've been waiting to cover for basically the lifetime of the podcast. So very cool.
I'd be happy with any of those, honestly.
Right.
I was looking at Devil All the Time again and looking at that cast and going, man, I didn't watch that movie because I knew we might cover it, and I'm kind of bummed.
Yeah, I think we bought the book a while ago, and it's sitting on my bookshelf.
Fight Club's one of my favorites. It's a classic. It's been a long time since I've seen it. I'm really curious to revisit Casino Royale, classic Bond. We never covered Bond. And
kind of the gold standard for Bond in my mind, at least.
And then Neil Gaiman, which is always a favorite. Yeah. I'd be really interested to revisit him. So great options. We'd love to hear from you, and enjoy this previously Patreon exclusive. And happy Thanksgiving.
This month we are covering the Kenneth Branagh Murder on the Orient Express from 2017. And, we covered the Agatha Christie novel, then we covered the Lumet film, and now we're here. And we talked in our main feed episode about how we were wondering if people would think it was weird that we didn't do the newer adaptation.
Yeah. Well, we've done it now, or we're doing it now, I guess. I'm curious to know what you thought of this movie.
Yeah, I have tons of thoughts. I want to start with good things. I want to start with I really like the look of this film. I thought it was beautiful. I thought that there was great color. I thought there was really interesting things to look at. But I also felt like that tended to be the scale of the movie almost felt like it was sort of losing the intimate story that Agatha Christie was setting up. And some of that started to weigh on me a little bit but in terms of how it looked, I did a bunch of background reading on this stuff. So it was shot with a 65mm camera and some of the same ones that were used for Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk. So it was shot on film itself. And that's a notable thing because it's keeping film alive in that way. The history of that. And Christopher Nolan, of course, Kenneth Branagh was in Dunkirk, which Christopher Nolan directed. And then there's a cameo of Christopher Nolan in Murder on the Orient Express, which Kenneth Branagh directed. Yeah, he's one of the waiters or something in the background of one of the scenes at one point.
That's too funny. I didn't recognize him. I mean, I've seen Christopher Nolan, but I it's one of those things where you're not expecting that sort of thing.
Cameos are tough sometimes. So I just think that's fun. And Christopher Nolan being sort of one of the people that's propping up film and keeping it alive in that form, and specifically shooting in 65mm to be projected in 70mm is also very notable because it gives you different dimensions to the film that you're watching. And there were times that I could feel that even in our streamed version that I was watching, like some of the way that you're able to get so much more in the frame, kind of, and the colors, like I said, tended to be like, there's the shot of them, all of the cast in the car, and as much as the cars are cramped still, there's some shots where these are like massive cars in comparison to the Lumet film.
Yeah.
But when they're all sitting around and it's so glamorous and it's so I don't know, it kind of course is like going to an extreme, but those are some of the things that I liked. And then ultimately a lot of this cast are some of my favorite people, like Olivia Colman specifically might be my like top 10 favorite actors right now. Olivia Colman's amazing. I loved seeing Leslie Odom Jr., who I knew from Hamilton, Aaron Burr in Hamilton, and so like that's nerdy for me. Like I loved that he was like in this and playing a pretty prominent role as well. I think this is his first theatrical feature film, like large role.
I was surprised to see Willem Dafoe. I didn't realize he was in this movie at all.
Yeah, there was a few people that were surprising as they popped up along the way. I didn't know Michelle Pfeiffer was going to play Miss Hubbard, and she was incredible. I'm going to eventually get to some things that I didn't think that I liked very much about this film, but I'm going to say here, performances weren't the thing that bothered me with this film.
It was a very different take on Mrs. Hubbard.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, she was from the beginning. She was a lot more fishy. You know what I mean? Like we didn't trust her. I saw her sort of code switch at one point, and all of a sudden start behaving differently. So I was suspicious of her immediately. In a way that I wasn't of the other Mrs. Hubbard. The other Mrs. Hubbard seems like a complete goofball.
Right. Similar to the novel.
Yeah. So it's a different portrayal of that character. Yeah. I mean, so yeah, let's start with positives. Familiar with the phrase, damning with faint praise? I think I'm going to give some of that. It was funny. I think there was a closer attention to comedy and in a sort of a modern way.
That's one of the main things, is it felt very like a modernized, like blockbuster, large budget film in a way that the 70s version didn't feel quite that way. No,
definitely not. Which I mean, it's made in the 70s. It's not gonna feel like a modern blockbuster. But yeah, I know it didn't. And then I think Branagh as Poirot was quirky. He was playing up this like perfectionism thing. He had these eggs. He like explained his worldviews and why he is really good at being a detective. It's like detecting imperfections in people and in situations and how it stands out to him. And he's really good at like identifying things that are out of place. He took that to an extreme, I think, to sort of underscore the character. And in that sense, like I felt like it simplified Poirot in a way that made it accessible and made me feel like, okay, I get who this guy is and why he's a detective I want to follow. But it did like remove a little bit of the mystery of the character too.
Yeah, I was gonna say with like bringing in some of his backstory, there's the moment where he's like looking at the photo. It makes him less mysterious, and also they're kind of making him similar to other like eccentric detectives that we've seen before. Yeah. Whereas I felt like the Finney version was not anything like a detective I'd really seen before.
No, yeah.
You think of like the Pink Panther, I guess. There's some stuff like kind of like that. Yeah. But it's his portrayal is they like kind of grounded him a little more, and they were showing when he was struggling with the mystery, which was something that we didn't get in either of the other versions of the story. And him struggling with the mystery is interesting because I felt like he was so confident and so able to process things so quickly that he knew what it was right away, but was just like sort of going through the motions of figuring everything out in the Agatha Christie story and then the Lumet film. Yeah.
I'll give him credit for withholding some of the Armstrong details in a way that is at least similar to the book. It felt a lot more like the book, where like the Armstrong stuff only became important when it was important to the plot. We didn't get it at the beginning. I still don't know what the better way to do it was.
Well, I would say that the Lumet version with it at the beginning kind of does give you the biggest red flag at the beginning of the movie to kind of know like this is ultimately what the murder's about. Yeah. Like something going on with this. Whereas like going in without it, I like.
You don't know how it's going to be about that, and you kind of know something, and you're trying to connect the dots in a way where this you don't know anything. And you're just thinking it's a pure whodunit with no motive, so it's just a different approach. It's hard to say which one's better. One thing I wanted to say that before I get into more of my criticisms about the movie, I don't know. I'm curious if we were to try a different way of covering this kind of stuff in the future. If we were to do another Agatha Christie, for example, if we were to read like 75-80% of the book, basically up to like some of the big reveals, and record an episode on that, and then go watch the movie, and then come back and talk about it, because I do think my appreciation for these movies is lessened a little bit by already knowing the reveal. And so I was really struggling, because this is now my third time through the story fairly recently. Like, I know. So, I think I was set up to be more hypercritical, which in a movie like this is honestly not going to do it any favors. I would have been better off just going for the ride and trying to figure out what's going on. But I already knew what was going on, so instead I was just being hypercritical.
Right, and so for people who come to just this newer version of this movie, having not read the book or seen any of the other movies, this is going to probably hit you pretty squarely, and you're going to be like, wow, that's a fun, really good mystery, because you're not going to have the premise of, or at least the context of everything else that's gone on before this.
There was some homages to the 74 film, I thought. I don't know if you caught them. Like, I thought there was a couple of shots that were like set up to be very similar. In particular, we talked about them on the river. There was one moment on the river that looked almost identical to the other movie. There were moments, on the train on occasion where it felt like, okay, this is a reference to that other version. It seemed like, nice little nods ahead to it at most, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely felt that was going on. I think that Kenneth Branagh wanted to approach this as like a really glamorous like nod to that sort of time period of like Hollywood actors and them being on this like really lavish trip and this journey, and he wanted the cinematography to match that in ways. But there's so one thing I wanted to say with, like, I was talking about how much I love like Olivia Colman and a lot of these actors. One thing is that I felt like with this cast and with the cast of even the other 74 version, I felt like, some people don't have a ton of time to shine, but it's very cool to see them in the roles. So that's part of the novelty of this story, is like getting to see Willem Dafoe in a small role as like a character actor.
Yeah.
Or, a lot of these people who are in this story tend to be that kind of. I think we should jump into some of the things that I didn't necessarily like about this movie.
Real quick, I do want to say I like seeing Daisy Ridley and stuff. I like seeing her outside of Star Wars, doing something different here, and I thought she was cool.
I think she's great. I'm excited to see her career for the next, however long she wants to work, because I think she's definitely got a great. She has like a presence on film, I think. So
I agree. Johnny Depp, I still don't know how to feel about Johnny Depp these days, but I thought he was pretty good here. He was. I read
a story that he showed up to set like late and like hungover or something, and Kenneth Branagh like whipped him into shape and like chewed him out in front of everybody, and then he was early every day for the rest of the shoot, and so he kind of needed that sort of firm hand, I guess.
Okay. I mean, he does seem like a guy whose life is in a lot of disorder. And I don't know where this was back in 2017, so I think clearly at the time, from stuff we've heard, he was in the middle of it, I think. Right. So, I wish him well. I hope that he's not someone I shouldn't wish well. I don't know the details. Right. We talked about a little bit in the Stand coverage that he's had some, his
connection to Amber Heard.
Heard stuff is like just a huge mess. And like, honestly, if you want to read more about it, go look it up, because, I don't get into that tabloidy stuff, and I don't read a ton about it. I just know a little bit. So
I want to sort of frame a lot of these things that I'm going to start to say, because it's not that I was like actively like hating this film. It was just things that I was feeling like. For one, I felt like it kind of overstayed its welcome in a way that the other film didn't. It kind of really dragged out.
It was long,
Yeah. And it was because of like multiple added twists that they were trying to sell us on. So I get if it's your first time seeing it, why you might appreciate those. But for us, I was like, oh man, this is really like,
it's kind of wasting time, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And then, but another thing that I wanted to frame this story with is a quote that I read from Kenneth Branagh. He described the first scene between Johnny Depp and Michelle Pfeiffer, that weird, like rapey, like whatever Johnny Depp's character was doing. Yeah. All that stuff was gross. But Kenneth Branagh described that as being from the kind of movie that would be playing within a movie. And him saying that in that quote, like, rang true for how I feel about almost this entire movie. It feels like the movie that you see inside playing, that's a character's watching inside of a movie.
Yeah.
Very over the top, very big performances, and also like I don't know that I don't want to say that there's not a ton of substance to it, but it doesn't feel like it's like it feels like a Hollywood giving a ton of money to a story that has like a lot of history and name recognition, and then saying like, make this, and then the added scene in the beginning with the imam, the priest, and the rabbi, and just like they felt like they just had so much money that they could add in whatever they wanted to. And part of me appreciates that, because it's like, I get that they're setting up this universe with Poirot, and they're gonna do the Death on the Nile like shout out near the end. They had this story that was set up in kind of, well, actually, this is kind of a different thing, right? It was like a French soldier thing that Agatha Christie set up. It was like his former journey, right, before coming into the Orient mystery.
I don't remember.
He had done something with like the French army, and like helped them, like,
they're setting up the Death on the Nile, which is the next movie though, that at the end. And yeah, there definitely seems like they're setting up an extended, universe of movies here. They're trying to set up a franchise.
Right. And part of me appreciates that, because they're bringing in things from other Agatha Christie stories. Like, you clearly, I was like, oh, this wasn't in the original story or in the 74 film. So this stuff, like, anytime that happened, I was like, this must be from another Poirot story that they're pulling in. So, and in that way, it's kind of fun, but it also feels like it's padding it and adding more to it in ways that it doesn't necessarily need to.
So, taste is subjective. I understand that. But I'm going to contradict something you said earlier. I didn't think this movie looked very good.
Really?
I mean,
what parts, like the sprawling like CG train sequences, the establishing stuff?
Those were bad. Those were real bad.
Yeah. Because that's not what I'm talking about necessarily.
I understand. I thought that, to me, the colors were drab in a way that the other movie, by comparison, seems very colorful. I think there was a certain inauthenticity about everything I was seeing. It very rarely felt like I was actually on a train, if ever. I kept wondering, like, how many of these scenes were actually shot on a train, or not many at all. They felt like sets, and I'm not saying that like every scene in that other movie was shot on a train. It just felt that way. You know what I mean? It seemed to me like, I guess Kenneth Branagh, he wrote and directed this. It felt like he desperately didn't want this movie to be on a train. It felt like every opportunity he could get, he took them outside of the train. He has them walking on the roof of the train. He has them going out and having tea parties in the snow. He has the final reveal in a tunnel instead of in the train itself. It felt like everything he could do, he wanted outside of the train. He wanted a big action sequence in the scaffolding. And I was so frustrated, because I'm like, if you're going to make Murder on the Orient Express, you make the Orient Express a character, like we kind of talked about. Like, you make it an essential part of the movie, and you lean into it, and you make it about how trains are magical. Like, they're really cool things that we've invented as humans, and you lean into that. And to me, this was the complete opposite. It was doing everything it could to get away from it. I thought the movie was excessively blue and white. There was very little other colors going on. And then when you got opportunities to have like flashbacks, he would go black and white. There was the scene in the Lumet film that was that really sort of almost creepy blue, the stabbing sequence. And instead this was black and white. And I just found so many moments where they could have done something interesting. And instead it felt like, I don't know, just kind of bland, and safe. And it did feel very much like a, like you said, just kind of a modern movie, modern blockbuster attempt that's not going to take too many risks, is hopefully going to, be fine. It's like, I feel like this movie was made to be fine. No one was trying to make an iconic movie. No one was trying to make an iconic adaptation that's going to go down in history as like, oh yeah, that's going to rival the Lumet film. I don't think anybody thought this was going to rival the Lumet film, or if they did, they were deluding themselves, because they didn't set out to make a movie like that. I don't think, and that was frustrating to me in a way that I bet it's not for a lot of people. But for me, it was like, I don't know. This is the kind of stuff I really don't like.
You're picking up on something that's definitely there. So let me start out by talking about why the movie felt the way that it did in terms of sets and things like that. So Kenneth Branagh is a stage actor. He's obviously a director. He's an actor first, and in being an actor, he also cares about actors more than I would say he cares about directing, if that makes sense. But a director is usually very connected to actors. But basically, from what I can gather about this movie, is that it's kind of a vehicle to have a bunch of great actors in a film like this. Was how Kenneth Branagh was treating it. And I read this other interesting piece of backstory about this movie. Veteran actress Jacqueline Bisset, who starred in Murder on the Orient Express in 1974, told director Kenneth Branagh how excruciating it was to shoot the extended scene in which the murder was revealed. To avoid this feeling among the actors and actresses in his version, Branagh shot his side as Poirot first and cut whenever he could when shooting the actors and actresses up close. And he did everything to make sure the whole cast spent as little time as possible on set during the lengthy scene. And I think that kind of goes to show how he feels about the entire movie, because he's like, I want my actors to be comfortable. I want to get good performances from them. But ultimately, this whole story is kind of a vehicle for having all of these stars in this. And there's, it's like you said, it's not going to go down. And I agree with you. It's not going to go down as a great adaptation because it wasn't really the intention. He wasn't reinventing the wheel here. He was sort of just pulling together a great cast to make something that has the name recognition and really make something that would be fun with other actors that he loves and appreciates, because they are all basically his friends, acquaintances, other actors that he's worked with before, whether directed with them or acted with them. So the fact that you're picking up on that, I think that rings true completely. I will disagree with you. Maybe some of the movie didn't look great, but I do still stand by my fact that the movie, in terms of looking incredible through the lens, there are some amazing shots in this movie. There's some amazing tracking extended sequences with really cool cinematic design, shooting through glass and doing some things to make actors and the reflections look interesting. I think that it's a well shot movie, and I'll stand by that. But like you said, some of the when I started to feel the scale of the movie was sort of bigger than its britches, I guess, it was when we were getting these massive sweeping Hollywood shots of the train and the snow and the avalanche is coming down. You mean when a
lightning bolt strikes a mountain and causes an avalanche that almost derails the train? Yeah, it was a little bit over the top.
It's definitely over the top. So I agree with you on that as well.
So yeah, I mean, I can see what you're saying, and there was some interesting moments where they were filming from above. To try, the camera kind of becomes magic in a sense. It's it's viewing from an angle that you couldn't physically be in when you're on a train,
right?
But
which is very opposite of Lumet's
the opposite of Lumet's thing, and I'm okay, so I guess you're just leaning into let's make this feel as big as possible while being on a train. But I just I disagree with that. That approach to this subject matter. I think you have to lean into the claustrophobia of being on a train.
Right. Like I said, I think it loses that intimacy of the story. You're also getting at, and I read something about Branagh talking about the over the head shot during the murder and not shooting coverage to show the murder and all this other stuff. He just wanted that top down view because it's so odd and off putting, and then ultimately leaves you wondering, and it kind of gives you you know how Wes Anderson has his sort of dollhouse thing that he does sometimes in his movies? Yeah. This sort of had that top-down clue, looking at a board game almost sort of feel to it in that scene.
I think that's what he was going for. I've seen other directors do it well. I can think of Vince Gilligan in Breaking Bad at times that's done this, and it's always a surprising, cool effect when it does that. And
the scene of Jesse floating when he takes heroin or whatever, that's then floating up towards the ceiling camera. That's so awesome. Yeah.
And that's my thing too. Is just because you have a tool in your toolbox, I don't know. I guess the clue thing is probably what he was going for. It just felt like a weird decision for me in this moment. I don't know.
Yeah. No, and I get that, yeah. Especially because like I prefer Lumet's like intimate like look at the film.
But the decisions to have so many action-y sequences and big moments and like big sets, and I don't know, man, it felt a little bit frustrating to me. It again felt like that's not the point of this story. Like it's very similar to like just the moment of having all of a sudden we flash to Poirot is like pacing along on top of the train through the snow, and then he's back inside like a minute later, and there was no real reason for him to have been out there. That was how I felt about basically every scene like that. Like just unnecessary. We just wanted to show that and, you know, give you a break from the train for a minute because we really don't want you to feel like you're on a train for this movie for some reason.
Yeah. So it reminds me of like, so for example, he has that fight scene where he's like the gun shoots him, and then he like looks at the powder pouring out, and then he knows to flick it and use his cane and all this stuff.
Oh yeah.
And it reminds me of how I felt when Guy Ritchie's like Sherlock Holmes films came out.
Yep.
As much as like I thought that it was fun, especially when it came out, it's like that's not the point of Sherlock Holmes, to be like analyzing somebody during a fight and then like break him down because right. So like, and it feels unnecessary, like you say, but that kind of stuff, it like stimulates general audiences today. So like and of course he was trying to make a broader film. He's a theatrical. I think he literally acts at like the Shakespeare Royal Opera or something. So it's like he knows what he's doing. He knew he was making a broad movie.
Yeah, I guess so. And I should have expected this for this movie, but I didn't. I did not expect to see Poirot getting in fistfights with people and like using his cane to trip people and just like be kind of action-y, and maybe I should have, just because it's like it's modern day. I mean, he wasn't like Sherlock in those movies. He wasn't actually a brawler or anything. You know, he wasn't getting in tons of fights, but there was enough action. He was chasing Josh Gad that one time, you know, in a I don't know, a moment that I found incredibly dull, even though it was supposed to be exciting, because I'm like, what is the point of this? And again, I do think we set ourselves up a little bit to be hypercritical because we know what is important and what isn't in this story.
Yeah. I can see somebody going in and seeing this movie and having this be their first experience with the material and really enjoying it. So,
and I want to just like, it's a pet peeve, I guess, of mine, and something that, if you ever make a movie that I get any sort of point where I can give you some criticism.
Yeah.
If you ever have a sequence where people are standing around in the snow talking, I need to see that fucking breath. I immediately noticed there was no breath, and I was like, what is happening? And like the rest of the movie, I couldn't. every scene that takes place outside, you can't see their breath at all, which just completely breaks my immersion. Tells me they're on a set. They're not actually cold.
Well, there was the scene when they were drinking tea or whatever, and they get up from the tea table and they walk towards a mountain, and it was so clear that it was green screen.
Oh man,
I was like, oh boy,
it looks so bad.
It's kind of a lot.
And like,
but again, and for the comfort of the actors, that's why he did it.
You can
know
add
I mean?
it.
Like,
you can do it with CGI. It might not look great, but like I've seen it done pretty convincingly.
Well, I just mean like not being on location. And like being on a green screen makes sense.
What's crazy is how much money they spent on that CGI and stuff to make it look like that. Like they probably could have afforded to like build a freaking train car and go somewhere on set and actually film it. It just would have it would have been like people would have had to travel. It would have been annoying. You can't shoot it in LA on a sound stage or whatever. You know?
I think this was mostly shot in Europe, in like London or something like that.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, regardless, I'm sure it was on sets, you know, in a comfortable studio. It seems like for the vast majority of it.
Yeah, and ultimately that's what it is, kind of, right? It's supposed to be this comfort vessel for these actors all to come together and sort of get to embody these actors that they love from the 74 version. So, this is my question while we wrap up here. Death on the Nile is coming out. Are you excited for it or not? Like with this portrayal of Poirot, like, are you gonna watch it? Yeah. Is it something that you're interested in checking out in the future?
I mean, I'll tell you, ultimately, I know I'm kind of like, I'm being pretty critical here, and I did have a lot of criticism, but like, it was fine. You know what I mean? It's hard to actively dislike this movie. There wasn't a lot for me to like about it either. One thing I'll tell you is that my wife had a pretty good time with it. She had seen this version first before before the Lumet version. She watched the Lumet version with me, liked that one, but she likes this one, and and she was talking about how she kind of wants to see that Death on the Nile. I'd be down to watch it, and that's why I was saying, like, if we're gonna cover another Agatha Christie mystery, I wonder if the way to do it is to preserve that, because I do think a little bit of the joy of watching these movies is taken away once you know the reveal, and I might have a better time with it if I didn't know.
Yeah, we talked about the other story that I would like to cover in the future as well, the one on the island.
Oh, yeah. It's and then there were none.
Yeah, I'd like to cover that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Death on the Nile, I'd be interested in seeing as well. And ultimately, that's kind of where I land on it. This is the kind of movie that, like, I enjoy watching it to a certain extent. Like, I like watching it because it's not challenging, and I know that some people will feel that same way. Like, it's fun because we get to see all of these massive actors come together in this big movie and see how broad it's going to be, and like ultimately, like, I can have a couple drinks and just like sit down and enjoy myself through something like this and realize that it's not going to be maybe something directed by Sidney Lumet, and it wasn't like the Lumet version was perfect either.
I mean, like, I agree. Like, I can do that, but that's not my preference. Like, I'd rather enjoy a movie that's really
absolutely
good.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think going in, like you said, I knew going in what we were getting with this, I think. And that kind of shaped where I was at with it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I enjoyed it because it is something it's an Agatha Christie story. It's fun to see all of these actors in these roles. So
I would be curious to see, like... to me, this doesn't feel like Kenneth Branagh was trying to make something iconic that was going to, like, go down in history as a great adaptation or go down as a great film. And I would like to see him try that. You know what I mean? And feel like he's really going for it. Because I could feel a certain lack of care in the movie where it was just, it felt like things were good enough and that was fine. Let's go on.
I like to see actors become directors, but it's really interesting to think about, like, how close he is with Christopher Nolan, clearly, and to see a movie that, like, Christopher Nolan's going to go in to make that's, like, going to be different than anything you've probably seen, and, like, the care that goes into it, and then Kenneth Branagh getting the opportunity.
It's the complete opposite of Nolan. He lives and dies by that. Like, whether or not it works, he's trying to make something that's going to be, a part of his oeuvre that he is going to feel confident and good about.
Where, like, Kenneth Branagh wants to go hang out with people that he loves and, like, get to make a fun movie.
It's like, let's just make a thing, make some money, and
I'm just talking about this movie too. We're not talking about Kenneth Branagh, like, overall. It's just this movie.
Well, he directed Thor, which is like Thor and Thor 2. It's like probably my least favorite.
He didn't direct Thor 2.
Oh, he didn't do. Well, he just did Thor 1. Okay, so Thor 1 was better than Thor 2. I'll give it that. So it's not my least favorite Marvel movie, but, like, the kind of stuff that I start to get bored in Marvel is when I feel like they're just kind of phoning in the blockbuster, and that's how this movie feels.
Yeah, agreed. Well, I think that this is a good place to stop.
Yeah, sorry if you love this movie and I just kind of blasted it, but I mean, hey, I got to be honest. That's what we're doing here.
And again, it's not that we've hated it. No, I enjoyed parts of it, and I had a fun time.
Damning with faint praise, I feel like was going to be my theme for this one. Like, it was okay.
Yeah. So ultimately, that's where we land on it. And until next time.
Thanks for listening.